if centralization is the end game. We touched on stablecoins as a way to perhaps create more demand for U.S. treasuries, but let's use that as a jumping point to talk about CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. And a reminder to our viewers, those are government-issued digital dollars. They're programmable, they're traceable, they're centrally controlled. And again, the real concern is control, because a CBDC would let the government track every single transaction, track your spending, limit how or where you use your money, what transactions are allowed or not allowed, can even make your money expire if not spent within a certain amount of time. The biggest concern is that it gets linked to a social credit score, and that ultimately leads to an Orwellian dystopian future where if you don't behave, your money isn't being, you can't use your money, or you can only use your money to do certain things that the government allowed. And again, people say this is ridiculous, but A, it's happening in China with their social credit score and the digital yuan. And if COVID taught us anything, it's that when given the ability, governments will exceed their power. I remind our viewers that there were curfews in countries like Canada, where the truckers who were protesting against the vaccine were kicked off the financial system. And that's a lot easier to do when you have a CBDC. In certain countries, there were curfews, and certain goods were deemed essential or non-essential. With a CBDC, that money can be programmed to just not be usable to conduct a transaction that the government may deem is not essential at a particular time and period. So anybody that knows me knows that CBDCs are one of my really, really pet passions. And the good news is that the Senate is expected to vote on an anti-CBDC bill that bans the Fed from creating one. That bill is still in progress. The language there may change, but essentially it's the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act, and it's designed to ban the Federal Reserve from issuing, testing, or implementing a CBDC. But as you mentioned, we have had the Genius Act pass. That has passed already. And critics say that this could be the stealth gateway to a CBDC-style financial system through stablecoins. What this act does is it creates the framework in the US for payment stablecoins. Again, for our viewers, that is digital tokens pegged one-to-one to the US dollar, fully backed by high-quality liquid reserves like cash or short-term treasuries. Only approved issuers like US banks, credit unions, financial firms can offer these tokens to the public. On the upside, it may create more demand for US treasuries. These companies do have to comply with AML, KYC, and OFAC rules. They have to submit to federal oversight, mostly from the OCC. Now, this law, to be fair, does keep the Federal Reserve out of direct issuance. But what it does do, according to some critics, is that it lays the foundation for programmable money, surveillance-friendly digital infrastructure, and a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem of narrow money, digital cash that does not circulate through traditional credit creation, held as tokenized treasuries, and sort of lays the groundwork for a potential CBDC, especially if this anti-CBDC bill doesn't get passed. So what is your take on this?
Well, you said so much there that is so good, and you are passionate and have been consistent in your concerns about central bank digital currency, and I want to answer
I'm
them
a
all.
libertarian, Matt. Essentially, I'm a libertarian. But go ahead. Is
It's
this a
very
concern?
clear. It is a concern, and there's a lot of reasons. And again, it goes back to the very opening point we made about debt. And I've said also, and many others would remember this, when you have a debt crisis, that leads to a market crisis, a currency crisis. It usually leads to a debt crisis. Obviously, the debt crisis leads to a currency crisis and a market crisis, and that leads to an inflation or a debasement crisis. And when the currency is debased, that leads to a social unrest because you're no longer able to buy things with your currency. Social unrest is always, without exception, solved by extreme centralization from the political left or right, the extreme left or right. And this is true throughout history. So again, debt to centralization is proven by history, not optimization models of the FOMC. That's why history and math both matter, which brings us to stablecoin, CBDC, and all the questions you've raised. Again, the Genius Act, like the Patriot Act, like stablecoin, they're all oxymorons. To me, the stablecoin is neither stable nor a coin. The Genius Act is not a genius act, it's a stupid act. And the Patriot Act was not patriotic. But those are just sensational things to say. What do I really mean by that? How are these things oxymorons? And to your point, hey, it's stablecoin. It's not CBDC. In fact, the same Genius Act was it was a bill that came out and it's being passed at the same time they're bringing this anti-CBDC Act out. And then whether stablecoin should be SEC or CFTC registered. So these three acts coming out at the same time. This is a classic example of the smoke and mirrors kind of disingenuity of DC legislation and the complexity of the plumbing. And I'm sorry to be so perma cynical, and some would say tinfoil hatted, but let's be clear. Stablecoin is CBDC by just another name. It's not issued by a central bank. It is issued by the JP Morgans of the world, the Tethers of the world, the Circle Internets of the world. And I'll explain why that's no different than a central bank in a second. But let's first be clear. The fact that they're outlawing central bank digital currency to calm the libertarians like you down from being intimidated is an insult to your intelligence. They're hoping that you don't understand the plumbing of what's really going on with stablecoin and the DLT ledger and the ISO compliant technology and the programmable trackable technology and the censorable technology that is still behind stablecoins. So no, it may not be from the Fed, but it's coming from JP Morgan, it's coming from fintech groups, and it's coming from these kingmakers that the Genius Act just made, including Tether and JP Morgan. If you don't think that that's linked on that DLT ledger to the government and you believe that's separate and private, that's your opinion. I'm saying my opinion, that's no different. That's half a dozen of this, six of the other. It's not just an entry drug to CBDC, even if they outlawed, excuse me, but it's just another form. These banks, the Fed, the fintech, JP Morgan, they're all part of a way to track and program and seize and censor your assets. That's the first thing. So no, stablecoin is not anti-CBDC. It's just another version of it. I strongly believe that, and I'm certainly not alone. The other thing about stablecoin, it's really basically backed by US Treasuries, of course, short-term treasuries, but that assumes that US Treasuries are stable. And if we learned anything from the banking crisis in 2023, Signature Valley Bank and First Republic were stable yesterday or one day, and they weren't the next day. In other words, this stable coin is a unit of account. You give a dollar to Tether, you give a dollar to Circle Internet, you give a dollar to JP Morgan's a stable coin account, and you'll get a dollar of electronic spending back. Meanwhile, those will take your dollar and they'll arbitrage it in the treasury market and they'll get yield and they'll make money off of your dollar while you go out and spend it anywhere you want with your e-dollar. It is a way to create demand for US Treasuries. It's a way to create demand for the US dollar right now because of stablecoin. Tether has made 26 billion in profits off of your dollars because they're arbitraging that on the treasury markets. And they're also now the 18th largest lender to Uncle Sam. So it's a win-win for Tether, Circle Internet, JP Morgan. It's not necessarily a win for you, the citizen. It gives you an e-dollar, but you're getting no yield on it. And you're subject to the risk of the treasury that backs that quote unquote stable coin. Again, you could argue there's no risk. I would remind you that there is risk in treasuries and you don't have to go that far back to see it. So again, it's not necessarily as stable as you think. And it certainly is not as freedom giving as you think. And it is very much CBDC in substance and form, in my opinion. So there's a lot of things wrong with it, but it's making these kingmakers very wealthy. It is a wealth transfer. There are sons of presidents and other insiders from Silicon Valley to DC who are going to make a fortune on this. That may be business as usual in DC, but it's no surprise there. But it's a kingmaker too, because only commercial banks can actually offer a stablecoin client some yield. The fintech companies can't. So they just made Jimmy Dimon even more powerful. And this goes back to this idea of the marriage between big banking, big government, big corporations. Again, I'm an American, I'm a patriot, come from a family of veterans, spent half my life in the US, like baseball scholarships. Please, I'm not anti-American, but if you're a patriot, you got to ask, is this patriotic? Look under the hood, look at the details. I don't think this type of marriage between big corporations, big lenders, and government policy is, to me, and this sounds sensational, the very definition of fascism, not democracy. And the fact that your programmable, trackable, seizable stablecoin just puts you into the gun sights, like those Canadian truckers. If someday, 6 years from now, I write or say something that offends, or I join a group that offends the powers that be, I am now censorable, trackable, and seizable. I think if Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Paine, and you name it, tried to get together in Philadelphia under a stablecoin regime, they probably wouldn't be able to even afford the bus fare there, because by the time they wrote a couple articles or got a few pages written or did a few interviews, they'd be trackable. So this may sound sensational. We should be very concerned about technology that outpaces wisdom. This is the problem with AI. This is the problem with the complexity and the plumbing of stablecoins and the disingenuous lipstick on a pig they put on it. It is an effect. Maybe it doesn't matter to some people. It doesn't mean you have something to hide. I have nothing to hide with my money, but I do have the right to privacy. I do have the right to keep what I've earned. I don't like a system that can track and seize my assets because it's masquerading as some type of technological efficiency. And again, I'll quote Saint-Exupéry, who said in the 1940s, we were capable of manufacturing 1,000 pianos a day, just not one worthy pianist. Just because we have technology, just because we have a lot of smart programmers, doesn't mean they're wise programmers, and doesn't mean the policies used by them are for our civil liberties or financial freedom. And this should be a concern to all critical thinking Americans, regardless of whether you're tech, left, right, pro gold, pro crypto. I'm all of those things, but there is a limit to the wisdom of this technology outpacing our political intelligence. And there's a dishonesty in not divulging and disclosing the risks behind the technological hype in the stablecoin. That's a long answer. I'm a libertarian too, Michelle, and it really upsets me. This Genius Act, which is the very opposite of genius, and this coin, which is the very opposite of stable.
Well, I think we're on the same page on that one, for sure. Matthew, we're running out of time, but I do have to get your thoughts on a couple of other matters. Otherwise, it would be I would be remiss of me if not touch on Bitcoin. You mentioned crypto. Let's talk about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has recognized a lot of the same issues. CBDC, one of them for sure, but Bitcoin has recognized the same systemic issues that you've warned about: the sovereign debt crisis, the loss of trust in fiat currencies, debasement, devaluation. But instead of gold, they see Bitcoin as the answer. They draw strong parallels between the two. Both have finite supplies, are decentralized, represent essentially a libertarian form of money. Bitcoin is borderless, instantly verifiable, portable. The maxis see Bitcoin being layered in to the system somehow. How do you see Bitcoin fitting in here?
Look, Bitcoin and Ethereum are not nearly as censorable as stablecoins, for example, and some of these other technologies.
Not so much as not in the CBDC kind of conversation.
Oh,
And I would not group, and I personally would not group Ethereum and Bitcoin in the same category either.
Not at all.
But I'm saying if Bitcoin is seen as digital gold, and if gold is potentially a layer to some kind of monetary reset, and a way to bring back trust and confidence into the system, can Bitcoin play a role here? Do you see Bitcoin playing a role? Could there be some kind of monetary reset with gold and Bitcoin?
I mean, it's a very fair question. I'm not one of those gold fanatics, gold bugs, or gold executives that has to mock Bitcoin to promote physical gold. I have a lot of close friends who are in the crypto space in general, the Bitcoin space in particular, and including Ronnie Sturfula, who writes the In Gold We Trust report. He takes crypto very seriously, takes Bitcoin very seriously. I don't think crypto investors or Bitcoin investors are insane for what they're doing, and I have a lot of conversations with them. And I learn a lot with each conversation. I don't think we have to be at odds to discuss Bitcoin and gold. First of all, our macro views, our libertarian views, and our sound money views about the US dollar and the US Treasury are basically identical. So 80% of the conversation between a Bitcoin expert and a gold executive are very symbiotic in osmosis and commensurate. The question I have is not a criticism, and I think it's a question that even serious Bitcoiners have to consider, and gold investors have to consider too, with Bitcoin in particular, because it is a much safer, less censorable technology. And it doesn't, we got to get into the origins of it or what that means, or Ripple and XRP highways and all these other debates, and Glenn Lilly and Jeff Mann and BTC. Is it Langley or Satoshi? Get past all that. Is it a store of value? Will it work in a system where the dollar doesn't disappear or become eradicated? It becomes less and less relevant, less and less safe, and less private. So will Bitcoin be a solution? The simple answer is, and will it be a part of this new world order, disorder, whatever reset to come? Without saying the Bitcoin camp, it depends on your perspective. I can say I see central banks stacking physical gold more than Bitcoin. I can argue that gold has an historical larger role as a store of value than Bitcoin. But certainly Bitcoin in a cold wallet is a heck of a lot easier to transfer. It's cross-border, it's safer, it's more private, etc. So I don't want to say that, well, that when gold rips, Bitcoin disappears and it's going to go to zero. What I think all of us have to look at in this debate is, ultimately, despite the common macro view that Bitcoin and gold investors share, will Bitcoin continue as a speculation asset? There's nothing better. It's outperformed everything on its highs. It's certainly outperformed gold. Is it still a store of value? And I think the jury's out on that. I have strong opinions, but I don't want to mock Bitcoin investors for that. I think what will be interesting in the evolution of Bitcoin is what happens when we have a Bob Farrell moment in a 49x earnings ratio on the Nasdaq. If the Nasdaq has a mean reversion moment, how will Bitcoin track? Will it track north as the Nasdaq tanks, or will it track and correlate to Nasdaq and show itself as just another speculation tech stock? Or will it divert? Will it convert outside of the Nasdaq narrative and show itself as an independent store of value? And we can argue, what is the store of value in Bitcoin? Is it its technology? Is it its price? What is it in gold? That takes hours. I don't want to mock crypto, and I certainly don't want to mock Bitcoin. But I think the real test will be, how does it behave in an uh-oh moment in the markets? We know how gold behaves. We've seen what it does, and we can track it. And we can argue we know how Bitcoin behaves in certain pullbacks or corrections, but we've never really seen Bitcoin in an uh-oh moment like '08, '87, 2001, 29. We've never seen it like I saw in the dot-com bubble, where what we thought were the greatest things lost massively. Bitcoin is not Amazon losing 92%. It is not the same thing as Amazon. But I think it'll be very interesting. And I think as a speculation, as an investment asset, there's nothing greater. It has a massive standard deviation, a massive volatility, which for me makes it harder for me to see as a store of value. And as a person who speculated on pre-IPOs and IPOs in the dot-com bubble, I am all about chasing the momentum and the sentiment to make money when I see something that obvious. And the question I have, and I'm not going to answer it, that's for everyone, is Bitcoin a sentiment momentum trade, or is it a new technology, a new libertarian way to store value and spend money? I think there are strong cases to be made for both. I'm not going to solve that today. What I love about the Bitcoin narrative and the Bitcoin rise is its disdain for reckless central bank policy, reckless currency policy, a government that insults your intelligence by trying to take your privacy and tell you it's good for you and that it's modern. I think all of those things about Bitcoin are extraordinary. And so I'm not going to make my gold case by insulting a Bitcoin crowd. And, I think the guys at Black Swan Capitalists and others who know this space are far more fluent in it than me. And I know some very bright people who are all about gold and also recognize and respect Bitcoin. I don't think it has to be a civil war between the two camps.
Well, I've always said that I'm in the camp of both gold and both Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Underlying philosophy is the same there, but I get your point
Mhm.
that it's still a risk-on asset, and until we
Mhm.
see it as a risk-off asset and really decorrelate it from the Nasdaq and the markets, it would be
Mhm.
interesting to see how that plays out as a store of value.
Yeah.
Very quickly, people say that quantum computing poses a potential existential threat to Bitcoin by potentially
Mhm.
breaking the encryption and undermining its security. Not going to have
Mhm.
you weigh in on that. We'll get a Bitcoin expert to weigh in on that. But is there an equivalent existential or systemic threat to gold? What would be the gold quantum computing existential threat
Mhm.